then Winston Churchill, and to the right, Madam Chiang Kai-shek. In other words, we were going to support the Chinese anti-communists by arming them. The communists were being armed by Russia, who gave them American Lend-Lease supplies that we were sending them, Russia, during World War II. In other words, our Lend-Lease goods being sent to Russia to assist them in defeating Germany were being sent to the Chinese communists, better known as, quote, agrarian reformers. After World War II ended, Chiang called for an election in 1948. Chiang was elected for a term of 6 years by a vote of 7-1. Chiang Kai-shek elected by the people through the representatives to the government of China by a vote of 7-1. But without a stable currency and adequate arms to defend his government from the heavily armed communists, Chiang's government fell. Communists Mao Tse-tung and Zhou Enlai took over in 1949. Chiang went to Taiwan, an island off the coast of China. In 1953, Congress ordered the State Department to publish the entire record of U.S.-China relations from 1942 to 49. Columnist Jack Anderson wrote about this report in Parade magazine in 1972 and said this about why China went communist. Number 7, the report showed beyond dispute that the burden of responsibility for China's loss weighed directly upon Chiang Kai-shek. Further, Chiang was uncooperative and his regime was thoroughly corrupt, unquote. So our State Department blamed China's loss on Chiang Kai-shek. People in the American government had nothing to do, of course, with the loss of hundreds of millions to communism. The Institute of Pacific Relations had no role in turning the Chinese over to the communists. Now, what was the cost of the Chinese Revolution? In 1971, the Senate Committee on the Judiciary issued a 28-page report entitled The Human Cost of Communism in China. The report says, number 8, Zhou and Mao were responsible for the deaths of as many as 64 million people. 64 million people. Zhou Enlai and Mao Tse-tung, the agrarian reformers, killed as many as 64 million to give the Chinese people the joys of communism. I'm sure they felt, Mao Tse-tung and Zhou Enlai, that some had to die, but that the end result was so desirable, so precious, so important, that no one would be critical of their decision to kill millions of people to reach that goal. Remember, Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the modern communist movement, said this, the end justifies the means. Whatever you have to do to get to your goal is what you have to do. Nikolai Lenin, the communist, the Russian communist, who killed between 22 and 45 million to give Russia the joys of communism, said this, quote, complete indifference to suffering is our duty. In the fulfillment of our calling, the greatest cruelty is a merit, unquote. In other words, killing people, even if it is millions you must kill, is acceptable if it helps you achieve the glorious goals of communism. That's a terrible place to end, but I think we must. We're running out of time. Next week, we're going to continue our study of the Chinese Revolution and some of the groups involved. We're going to show you briefly about the so-called Sino-Soviet split. It was a fraud. And then we're going to get into the population explosion next week. So I invite you once again to stay tuned next week to our program as we continue to explore the secrets of history. Thank you so very, very much.
Welcome to Secrets of History, a series of lectures exploring the conspiratorial view of history. It is the contention of historian Ralph Epperson that wars, revolutions, and depressions are planned years in advance, and that those who have been involved in the planning of these events have been ensuring that their involvement has been removed from recorded history. It will be Ralph Epperson's purpose to discuss the major events of the past and to remove the veil that has been utilized to cover up the secrets of history.
Epperson, and I'm the host of this series. Secrets of History is a 24-week lecture series which will explore the conspiratorial view of history. I have been studying the historical view that holds that the major events of the past have been caused intentionally. About 2 years ago, I published my book entitled The Unseen Hand, and there it is. I've subtitled it An Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. I published this book in 1985. Tonight's session is number 16 in the series, and tonight we're going to continue our study of the Communist Revolution in China in the middle 20s and 30s, and it's ending in 1949, and then what happened in China after the revolution was over. Last week we talked about the Russian Revolution that ended in 1949, and we showed you that someplace between, I believe it was 40 and 60 million Chinese died in that revolution. And now we can start with the series tonight. The killing continued even after 1949 when the revolution ended. Between 1953 and 1962, Mao Tse-tung, the leader of China, his Great Leap Forward, it was called, Great Leap Forward, starved some 27 million Chinese. The Great Leap Forward tried to change the economic base of China's economy from agricultural to industrial. This program resulted, as I said, in the starvation of 27 million people. David Rockefeller said this about the cost of the revolution after he returned from China in 1973, number 9. Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, and as I said, you remember the price of the Chinese Revolution was 64 million dead Chinese. So whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded. The social experiment of China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. Rockefeller said this a little more than 3 years after Chairman Mao made a public statement that, quote, number 10, appealed to the peoples of the world to unite and defeat the U.S. aggressors, unquote. In other words, Rockefeller said, I'm sorry that these 64 million people had to die, but look at the wonderful results of the communists. In other words, the end justifies the means. We're sorry you died, but look at the major accomplishments of the Chinese communists. One of the major accomplishments of the Chinese communists is that they have nearly destroyed the family in China. Valentine Chu, born in China and now a professional journalist, wrote a book in 1963 entitled The Inside Story of Communist China. In his book, Mr. Chu described the destruction of the family unit in China. He wrote this, number 11. The family everywhere is man's source of strength and courage, as well as his emotional harbor in times of natural disaster and personal misfortune. In China, it was even more so. It was society itself. The Chinese communists were acutely aware that their control of the people could never be effective unless the monolithic family system was destroyed. Destroyed, notice. This they set out to do as soon as they came to power. Another Chinese citizen, Reverend Xi Ping Wang, and I might be pronouncing that incorrectly, a Chinese missionary, told America what happened to the Chinese family when communism took control of China. He wrote this, number 12. The family unit is broken up. Husbands and wives are separated in different barracks. The children are taken away from the parents and placed in government-run nurseries. Husbands and wives meet only once a week for 2 hours. They have no other contact. The parents may see their children once a week, and when they see them, they can show no affection towards their children. Names are taken away from children, and they are given numbers. Numbers. There is no individual identity. That's what's happened to the family in China. That's the real way to destroy the family. You separate the husband and the wife, remove the child from the parent, and have the child raised by the state. Remember, one of the goals of Adam Weishaupt, was the founder of the Illuminati, was to destroy the family. And the way that the Chinese justify the fact that they removed the wife from the family is that she is needed to work in the fields or the factories to help produce food for the overpopulated Chinese people. In fact, the Boston Globe newspaper reported, number 13, 90% of the women work in factories and on farms and then attend schools. So there is no time for the Chinese woman to assist in the raising of the children or to be involved with her husband. The same thing is happening right now in America. This little graphic appeared in the U.S. News and World Report in 1981. It shows that in 1970, 39% of both partners in a marriage worked. That percentage had increased to 50% in 1980. That means that half of all marriages in America had no parent in the home to raise the children. That means that someone else is raising the children of these working parents in America. And that increases the demand that the government provide these working parents with taxpayer-supported daycare. And that increases government spending, and government spending increases government debt, and government debt increases government interest payments. Can you see how it works? And that pleases the bankers. And what caused the second parent to go out into the workforce? Simply inflation. The family cannot survive on the earnings of just one wage-earning parent, so the other goes out to supplement their earnings. And who caused the inflation? The bankers, by increasing the money supply. The bankers caused the problem, and then the bankers solve the problem. And you and I have to pay taxes, and that tax burden increases every year. Let me return now to our study of China. There are some 87 million people 60 years or older in China. They constitute 8% of the population, and that percentage is expected to leap to more than 20% by the year 2025. To further compound the problem, China has a mandatory retirement age of 55. The Chinese do have one solution to the elderly problem, however. In 1959, a report issued by the United States government entitled Communist Persecution of the Church in Red China said this, number 14. All the elderly people 60 years of age and above who cannot work, those who are over 60 who cannot work, are put in the old people's happy homes. After they are placed in the home, they are given shots. They are told that these shots are for their health. But after the shots are taken, they die within 2 weeks. That's the way to take care of the elderly problem in China, isn't it? The Chinese have recognized the major premise of the ultimate capitalistic system, communism. When a capital good no longer has utility, you discard it, as we've covered in the past. When a human capital good gets too old, you discard it. As we've seen, the New World Order is out to destroy religion. In China, number 15, it is illegal to talk about God or Christianity or any Christian belief to anyone 18 or under. Now, isn't that interesting? It is commonly believed that China has a, quote, population problem, unquote. In other words, China has too many people. The solution that they've decided, since they've decided they have a population problem, is to limit the birth of children. The population control minister in China said this, number 16. The size of a family is too important to be left to the personal decision of a couple. Births are a matter of state planning. The residents of each neighborhood meet each year to decide how many babies will be born and to which families. Contraceptive pills are distributed to the married women every morning. China has restricted childbearing to one child per couple. Number 17. A one-child certificate will be given to one-child couples who have been sterilized and to couples who promise not to have a second child for 4 years. Obviously, if there are less and less children being born in China, the population will decrease. That's the way they reason. Number 18. With each couple permitted to have only one child, the population of each succeeding generation will be roughly one-half that of the one gone before. Now that makes sense, doesn't it? If you eliminate births, you'll reduce the population. For having only one child, China decided to give the couple privileges, such as a subsidy in extra wages, priority in nursery schools, cheaper medical care, better housing, and bigger pensions. That sounds like a perfect solution, doesn't it? We're going to help those who have only one child. Let's see if that poses any problems to the Chinese, this one child per family certificate. China has had a very strong family tradition for centuries. The tradition is that the first male born, was to provide for his parents when they became old. So now we have the Chinese Communist government deciding that a married couple could only have one child. What happens if that one child is a female? The couple will have no one to provide for them when they get old. That's the way they think. So the parents decide to drown the baby girl child and then ask the government for another permit for a child in the hopes that that child will be a male. In 1983, Peking's newspaper in China, called the People's Daily, admitted that, number 19, the butchering, drowning, and leaving to die of female infants has become a grave social problem, unquote. Now, this is a magazine ad showing Chinese children, and it dramatically shows how this works. Notice in the picture that there are 4 young girl children and 8 young boy children. That's a ratio of 2 to 1. 2 boys for every girl. Some of those young men will not be able to marry when they want to. Now, this is another picture that illustrates the same thing. There are 18 children in this picture. Now, it's hard to tell, but it looks to me like there are 12 boys and 6 girls. Once again, it seems to show the same identical ratio of 2 boys to every girl. Secondly, and this is an interesting question, what happens if the married couple gives birth to twins or even triplets? Now what do? You're only allowed one child. So the parents kill the other child or the other 2 children in the case of triplets. They're only allowed one, don't forget. This is Stephen Mosher, an anthropologist from Stanford. He spent 1 year doing research in a rural Chinese village. He's written 2 books about his experiences in China called The Rural Chinese, and he wrote that book in 1983, and another book entitled Journey to Forbidden China in 1985. Mr. Mosher discovered that many parents want more than one child and have that child without government's permission. When the government discovers the pregnancy, they force the woman to have an abortion. There is no choice. Stephen Mosher said that, number 20, abortion in the 2nd and 3rd trimesters is common. In fact, over 1/2 of all pregnancies in China result in an abortion. Each woman brought into the delivery room must prove to the satisfaction of hospital Communist Party officials that she has a quota for the child. Those who cannot produce a government-issued birth certificate are given an involuntary abortion. This is, in fact, infanticide, for it results in the death of a full-term healthy infant. So the population explosion now is killing people in China. In 1981, the United Nations Symposium on Population and Human Rights, number 21, affirmed that compulsory abortion is a crime against humanity and a violation of human rights. Now that makes sense, doesn't it? We don't want the world killing its children. Yet, in July 1983, the United Nations gave Red China a medal honoring its population control program. Something's wrong. Something doesn't make sense. Unless that is what the United Nations wants, is infanticide. I'd like to recall that quote by David Rockefeller, number 22. He said this when he came back from China in 1973. Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded. The social experiment of China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. What is the social experiment that Mr. Rockefeller approves of? It is communism, mass murder, destruction of the family, murder of old people, destruction of religion, drowning of female children, murder of one of the twins, and compulsory abortion. The social experiment that Mr. Rockefeller approves of is called the New World Order. We're going to continue our discussion of that later on, even tonight. Now, in hindsight, we can see if the government that China's only elected leader, Chiang Kai-shek, gave to Taiwan was beneficial to the people. This is the result of Chiang's policies in Taiwan. Number 23. With 270 times the land area and 53 times the population, the gross national product of mainland China is only 10 times the gross national product of Taiwan. In other words, Taiwan outproduces China. In fact, the per capita income in both countries is this, number 24. In 1983, the per capita income in this communist experiment that Mr. Rockefeller approves of was only $240 a person. In Taiwan, it's over 10 times as much, $2,673. China has 53 times the population, yet only outproduces Taiwan 10 times. Why? It can't be the weather, because both China and Taiwan are in the same weather zone. It can't be the makeup of the people, because both China and Taiwan are populated with native Chinese. The only thing that is different is the fact that Taiwan believes in the free enterprise system and China believes in communism. In Taiwan, the people are allowed to keep that which they produce. In China, that which they produce belongs to the state. There's no reason to produce. In Taiwan, the people have the right to private property. In China, in the New World Order called communism, there is no right to private property. And the free enterprise system has proven once again, as it has for thousands of years, that it will outproduce the communist system. Someone once expressed the differences between the two this way, number 25. You know the 4 miracles of communism? Everyone has a job, but nobody works. Nobody works, but all plans are fulfilled. Plans are fulfilled, but nothing is available. Nothing is available, but everything is perfect. Isn't that exactly what's happening in China today? The failure of communism. These are 2 pictures of life in Taiwan. Now this is modern Taipei. You notice the lovely modern skyscrapers, the capital of Taiwan. And the second is a picture of a department store in Taiwan where there are plentiful goods. Now these are 2 pictures of life in communist China. The first is a picture of a commune in China, And I want you to notice the modern farm equipment. And this is another picture of life in rural China, also showing this modern farm equipment. In China today, 2/3 of the population are engaged in farming, and the people are starving. Only 4% of the people in the United States are similarly working in agriculture, to show you a comparison. In Taiwan, between 1952 and 1980, their gross national product increased 11 times, and their per capita income increased 5 times. Let's go back to Red China. The reason they're starving in China is certainly not communism, we're told. There's too many people. Now let's examine the population problem in Red China. Is that the problem? I think you would have to agree with me that it is not too many people that is their problem. It is too much communism. Communism cannot compete with the free enterprise system, and Red China and Taiwan are proving that. On July the 15th, 1971, Zhou Enlai extended an invitation to President Richard Nixon to visit China. Nixon accepted. Nixon accepted on the very day that Radio Peking, China's official radio station, issued the following statement, quote, "People of the world, unite and defeat the U.S. aggressors and all of their running dogs," unquote. Isn't that interesting? Nixon's acceptance of the invitation was indeed a strange one. In his book entitled 6 Crises, he said that admitting Red China to the United Nations would, number 26, give respectability to the communist regime and would probably irreparably weaken the non-communist governments in that area. Apparently, visiting communist China would not weaken the non-communist nations in that area, so Nixon went to China. Both Mao Tse-tung and Zhou Enlai died in 1976. Tributes from the American leaders flowed in and were reported in our newspapers. Remember, as you read these statements, that these two, Zhou Enlai and Mao Tse-tung, brutally starved, murdered, and imprisoned over 64 million Chinese. These are the comments of our leaders about Zhou Enlai. Gerald Ford said, "Zhou will be long remembered as a remarkable leader." Henry Kissinger said, "I admired Zhou very much." Richard Nixon said, "Zhou's legacy will be that he helped end the darkness." These are the comments made about Mao Tse-tung when he died. Gerald Ford, the president, said, "Mao was a very great man." Henry Kissinger said, "Mao was one of the titans of the age." And the New York Times said, "Mao was a moralist," whatever that means. These men apparently felt that Mao Tse-tung and Zhou Enlai had done a great thing for China. 64 million dead, and they did a great thing for China. In December of 1978, President Jimmy Carter recognized the Communist government of China as the official and legitimate government of that China. Remember that the Communist government of China has never, and I repeat, never been elected by anybody. But it is now the official and legitimate government of China. Senator Barry Goldwater spoke out against Carter's recognition of Communist China. Senator Goldwater said this, number 27, "I have no idea what motivated him," meaning President Carter, "other than the Trilateral Commission and the big banks, Chase Manhattan," notice, Chase Manhattan, "and the French bankers want to expand big business. This is a dangerous thing because it puts fear in our allies as to how the U.S. will keep its word." Now I'll expand what Senator Goldwater meant when he said that the Trilateral Commission wanted President Carter to recognize the communists in China as their government. But notice that the senator said that, quote, "the big banks," unquote, wanted President Carter to recognize the Red Chinese communist government. I'm sure that it is just a simple coincidence that less than 3 years later, on June the 27th, 1981, one of those big banks, the Chase Manhattan Bank, opened its branch office in Peking, China. In other words, Senator Goldwater is telling the truth about China. A former Chinese citizen named Dr. Chu Yuan Ho, forgive me for not pronouncing it correctly, said this, number 28. To recognize the Chinese Red regime is to discourage the people of the whole world. It will make the world know that the United States is unworthy to be a friend, that it sometimes betrays its most loyal allies, meaning Taiwan and the government of Chiang Kai-shek. But the final act came on January the 1st, 1979, when President Jimmy Carter severed diplomatic relations with the only elected government that China has ever had, the government of Chiang Kai-shek on Taiwan. Carter said, quote, "There is but one China, and Taiwan is part of China," unquote. Senator Goldwater said that President Carter's motives were economic, saying that Carter, number 29, did it for the big banks of the world, Chase Manhattan and the French bankers. The hypocrisy of America's action can be best summarized by the newspaper article, this one, that appeared on May the 7th, 1979. This is a picture of President Carter's Commerce Secretary, Juanita Krebs, touring the Great Wall of China. She's obviously enjoying herself. Notice the big smile. Now, this picture of Juanita Krebs was connected to an article about life in China. In other words, they were side by side in my paper here in Arizona. The picture of Juanita Krebs and this article. It says that a poster placed on a wall in Peking, China, said that political prisoners were being tortured and starved in China. In other words, Juanita Krebs and the others who recognized Red China are sorry that China killed 64 million people, that the communists have murdered and starved their own people, that they imprison political dissidents, and that they torture those political prisoners. We're going to recognize that brutal communist government so that we can enjoy the Great Wall of China while visiting the New World Order. We certainly do not want to require that the Chinese Communist government stop violating human rights. We do not want to interfere, we're told, in the internal affairs of Communist China. Now here's the main question. Why haven't our politicians and the media told us of the extreme conditions of life in China? Another who asked this question was Edward Lutwak, Associate Director of the Washington Center of Foreign Policy Research at Johns Hopkins University, who also visited Communist China. He wrote this, number 30. Why have American journalists failed to convey to us such fundamental Chinese realities? After all, the miserable poverty of the country is everywhere in evidence. Above all, how could they have missed the central phenomena of communist Chinese life, its unique, almost pure totalitarianism? One who answered this question in part was Congressman Edward Derwinski, who visited China in 1975. He said he found, number 31, a totally regimented society in which you see only model villages, model factories, model farms, model apartments, and scenic highlights. He went on to say that his visit was, number 32, very definitely a show operation. You see model communes, prearranged events, scheduled operations in hospitals. There is no seeing what you want to see. There is no communication with the people. If you want to talk to workers, they have been selected and are ready for you. We're not being given the truth about Communist China, but this brutal and oppressive government is today our new ally. In 1979, Ronald Reagan described the Communist Chinese government as number 33, still authoritarian and repressive, a statist monopoly founded on violence. On July the 21st, 1986, Ronald Reagan said, number 34, when we approach our dealings with communist governments and the governments of other countries where freedom is under assault, we do so knowing that we have a special responsibility. We must not only be mindful to our own interest, but we must also keep faith with those millions of souls who live under oppression. And I'm proud that during these last 5.5 years, we have kept faith with the people of the captive nations. To be true to ourselves, we must remain true to them. So many who live under communism see us as their only hope. Where was President Ronald Reagan in April of 1984? Ronald Reagan was in communist China visiting the Chinese dictator. Has China weakened its stand on communism? Was Reagan in China because China was strengthening its position on human rights? Xing or Teng Xiaoping or something, the new dictator, and I can't pronounce that name, said this in 1982, number 35. There are 4 things that are off limits for discussion, reform, or revision. They are, number 1, the socialist road, which means state ownership of the important means of production. 2, Marxist-Leninist Maoist thought, that is, communist ideology. 3, the leading role of the Chinese Communist Party. And 4, the dictatorship of the proletariat. In other words, we're sticking on our path. We don't care whether Nixon, Carter, Ford, and Reagan come here. We're sticking true to communism. And yet Ronald Reagan was there visiting this dictator. It's strange how politics makes strange bedfellows. Now, while we're talking about the Chinese Revolution, I'd like to talk about the so-called Sino-Soviet split of the late 1960s and the early 1970s. Now, we have been told that these two communist giants, Communist China and Communist Russia, were enemies and were actually fighting along the Chinese-Russian border. That's what they called the Sino-Soviet split. And to prove that it was actually happening, the American press gave us actual pictures of the troops from China and Russia fighting. I'd like to show you 2 of them that I found during my research. The first is this picture that appeared in Newsweek magazine on December the 25th, 1978. The caption underneath the picture reads, quote, Sino-Soviet border clash, notice the word, clash, 1969, botching a rapprochement with China. Notice 2 things. You can see 3 faces clearly in the picture, and all 3 are smiling. When troops clash, how many soldiers smile? And secondly, there are what appear to be 4 rifles shown in the picture, and all 4 rifles are strapped to their backs. When soldiers clash, they would presumably use their rifles. Yet each rifle in this picture is on the back of the soldier carrying it. This is a strange, strange border clash, isn't it? Happy soldiers clashing while smiling and not utilizing their weapons. And this is the second picture, and it's from the November 1st, 1982 edition of Time magazine. The caption under the picture reads, quote, seen from a troubled past, Chinese and Soviet soldiers stand eyeball to eyeball on the snow-covered Ussuri River during the 1969 border dispute. Now notice 3 things about this picture. The soldiers are not standing eyeball to eyeball. There are no weapons visible, and notice that they are walking peacefully towards each other. The caption says, "This is a picture from a troubled past." Yet there is not a single sign that there is any trouble in this picture. Now, why couldn't our media find actual pictures of clashes and trouble? Because there was no clashes, or there were no clashes and trouble. In other words, there was no Sino-Soviet split. The split was in the minds of the American media. They wanted a split, so they created it. And we are supposed to believe what we read in the newspapers, aren't we? But they told us, those who were illuminated, that there was no split by inserting these fraudulent pictures showing no clashes and trouble. They were telling those on the inside that the fabricated story who was just for the dumb American readers. They wanted a split, so they created a split. Nikita Khrushchev, the Russian dictator, once said something like this, number 36. "We spit in the eyes of the capitalists, and they think it is morning dew." But in this case, it was the press that was spitting in the eyes of the American people, and we thought it was morning dew. There was no Sino-Soviet split. I think that should be enough of the Chinese situation. I believe we should investigate and find out for sure, and if it's true, we shouldn't trade with them as we're doing today. Okay, let's get off the subject of the Red Chinese. Let's talk about this so-called thing called the population explosion. It started basically when Dr. Paul Ehrlich wrote this book, little paperback, called The Population Explosion. Population Bomb, forgive me. Population Control or Race to Oblivion by Dr. Paul R. Ehrlich. Dr. Ehrlich is a professor of biology at Stanford University, and he wrote this, number 37. "It is already too late." He wrote the book, by the way, we got to say that, in 1968. Dr. Ehrlich wrote the book in 1968. He wrote, number 37, "It is already too late to avoid famines that will kill millions, possibly by 1975. He also predicted, number 38, the total pollution and death of the world's oceans by 1979. Dr. Ehrlich's book was financed in part by the Ford Foundation. Isn't that interesting? Dr. Ehrlich continued, number 39, "We must, notice, we must have population control at home," meaning the United States, "hopefully through a system of incentives and penalties, but by compulsion if voluntary methods fail." He said this in continuing parts of his book, number 40. "A population of 1 or even 2 billion people," there is now over 4 billion people on the earth, so he wants to reduce the population down to 1/4 or 1/2. So a population of 1 or even 2 billion people could be sustained in reasonable comfort for perhaps 1,000 years if resources were husbanded carefully. That's the problem. There are just simply too many people. If we could only control population, then would the problem be solved. That's what Dr. Ehrlich is telling us. This advertisement appeared in the January 1970 Harper's Magazine. It reads, "Whatever your cause, it's a lost cause unless we control population." This ad was speaking to the American liberal who reads this magazine, urging them to, quote, "control the flood of humanity that threatens to engulf the earth," unquote. They were telling these liberals, all of your good causes will be swamped by simply too many people. The advertisement was supported by the president of the World Bank, the director of the Chase Manhattan Bank, the former chairman of Standard Oil of New Jersey, the president of the University of Chicago, and a former ambassador to NATO. The advertisement is signed by 28 names, at least 8 of which are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. It appears that the CFR, the Council, believes there is a population explosion. Were there too many people using up scarce resources and polluting the global environment? The first class I taught back in 1973 was at a community college in the Northwest. And the first classroom I walked into had a giant poster on the wall, probably about the size of that blackboard, as I remember, and it showed in cartoon form the Earth. It was a round globe, and there were little people simply packed on that Earth, all falling off. Many of them were falling off. So I said to myself, what does that try to tell us? Obviously, there's too many people. So I asked my students, these were all freshmen and sophomores in this community college, I said, how many of you believe that? Show me by a raise of your hands. Every hand in that room went up. All believed that there was a population explosion. As I said, I was living in Oregon at the time. So I asked my students, what would happen, would you guess, from your understanding of what you've been taught about this population explosion, what would happen if I moved, or we moved, everybody on the face of the earth to Oregon and sank the rest of the world? In other words, Oregon becomes an island, and there's not a piece of land anywhere else on the earth. And we move 4 billion people to Oregon. What's going to happen? Well, I got a couple of answers. My God, that's impossible. We couldn't do it. We'd stand on each other's shoulders. We'd reach 17 times to the moon. I can't even comprehend what's going to happen. So I said to them, let's work it out mathematically and see what happens about this population explosion. I moved 4 billion people, with 1 billion people, to Oregon. I moved the entire world to Oregon and discovered that number 41. A family of 4 in Oregon would have a lot 50 feet by 53 feet. That's the size of many residential lots in America. The entire population would move to Oregon, and a family of 4 would have a residential lot. What population explosion? It was interesting to watch the reaction. My students took that thing all over the campus, and I got reports back from the professors who were incredulous. Who said that? And they showed them the math that I gave them. But even then, the professors wouldn't believe it. There was a population explosion. Don't give me the facts. I don't want to know about the facts. I don't want to even think about it. I've been told there's a population explosion. There must be. The truth doesn't concern the planners. I'd like to examine several thoughts of those who believe this lie of the population explosion. How are we going to achieve this population control? Dr. Ehrlich said, number 42, one plan involves the addition of temporary sterilants to water supplies. Doses of the antidote would be carefully rationed by the government to produce the desired population size. That's what we're going to do. Put it in the water. And then if you want to have children, you have to get permission from the state, and then you'll get the antidote. Another similar proposal came in 1985 from Sir Francis Crick, a British socialist who foresaw the day when, number 43, no newborn infant will be declared human unless it has passed certain tests regarding its genetic endowment. If it fails these tests, it forfeits its right to live. Now here's another individual who said there was a population explosion. Howard Odom, a marine biologist at the University of Florida, said this, number 44. It is necessary that the United States cut its population by 2/3 within the next 50 years. Once it is cut to 75 million, the population could be stably employed in subsistence agriculture. Notice what Mr. Odom said, or Dr. Odom said. He said it was necessary for us to reduce the population. Necessary. We have to. Now, I ask the question, I'd love to ask this of this man personally. Will there be any choice for those who will have to be eliminated? And I want to ask him this question as well. Dr. Odom, will you volunteer to be one of those eliminated so that others can live? I seriously doubt it. Notice that Dr. Odom said that those who survive the reduction will be employed in, quote, subsistence agriculture, unquote. What is subsistence agriculture? Just enough food to live on. That is a pleasant thought, isn't it? It is claimed that the nation of India has too many people. So Premier Indira Gandhi decreed that a special emergency existed, and her government forcibly sterilized 10 million Indians. That's her solution, sterilize them. Was this drastic action required? Now, I'm not a great student of Indian history, but I do know a little. Let's take a look at number 45, and let's see whether or not this drastic action of sterilization was the problem in India. I'm just guessing, but back in the 1880s, when the population was its smallest, the people were still starving. When it started to grow in the 1930s, let's say, and it reached its medium population, the people were still starving. And then the 1980s, when it's got its largest population, they're still starving. Notice that India has been starving no matter what the population. It doesn't matter. The problem in India is not population, it is socialism. Socialism destroys the incentive to produce. Their economic philosophy encourages people to depend on government for their needs. I say that if India changed their system, India could probably provide food for the world. Now, who paid for many of these schemes to control population in America? Number 46. The first large foundations to make grants in the population field were the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, and the Ford Foundation. Isn't that interesting? We've talked about the foundations and what they're up to in this country in the past. Dr. Ehrlich added another thought, quote, the world is rapidly running out of food, unquote. It sounds to me like Dr. Ehrlich thinks that our food is in a large warehouse, and as we withdraw our daily consumption, the supply diminishes. Isn't that what he said? But the truth is that food is a renewable resource annually replenished. So it is not possible for our food supply to diminish. It is possible to reduce man's incentive to produce food through irrational, illogical, and improper economic systems like socialism, fascism, and communism. That's the problem. Give man the right to keep that which he has produced, and man will produce. Was there a population explosion? Is the world starving? Bob Berglund, a Secretary of Agriculture during President Jimmy Carter's administration, said this, number 47. The 4 billion people who inhabited the earth in 1978 had available about 1/5 more food per person to eat than did the world's 2.7 billion people had 25 years ago. In other words, there's plenty of food. That position taken by Bob Berglund was confirmed in 1986 when the United Nations World Food Council stated that record food stocks were piling up at an alarming rate in cereals, stocks, food, meat, dairy products, and other products. There's plenty of food. It's the economic system that distributes food that is the problem in the world, not the food supply. In 1983, here in America, John Bloch, the Secretary of Agriculture, during, I think it was Nixon's administration, or possibly even Reagan's, I guess, reported that American farmers agreed to idle 1/3 of their land in exchange for subsidies and price support loans. The world is allegedly starving, and the Department of Agriculture is taking 1/3 of our farmland out of production. So someone else spoke out about this so-called population explosion. This is Zbigniew Brzezinski, the National Security Advisor in President Carter's administration, and he said this, I think we accept the idea of a vast expansion in social regulation. It may take such forms as legislation. It may take such, notice this, it may take such forms as legislation for the number of children, perhaps even legislation determining the sex of children once we have choice, the regulation of weather, the regulation of leisure, and so forth. It appears that this is the reason that the so-called population explosion became a public issue. We were to accept a vast expansion in the regulation of our daily lives. More control to correct a non-existing problem. But we've been told there are famines all over the world. Now, we've heard about the current famine in Ethiopia. We've been told that the famine is caused by a drought. Is it possible that the famine in Ethiopia today was not the result of a drought, but the intentional starvation of millions of people by someone in Ethiopia who believed there were too many people? The current head of Ethiopia is communist, once again, I'll have to pronounce it the best I can, Mengistu Haile Mariam, apparently, Mengistu Haile Mariam, who came to power in 1974. He's done some very strange things. He's fixed food prices very low for government purchases. 2, he forced the people onto collective farms. 3, he's restricted the ability of farmers to obtain fertilizer and seed. The communist government under this man has forbidden the stockpiling of food for bad years. He called that hoarding. We don't want to hoard, you see. They've forbidden the saving of money from past harvests. He called that capitalist accumulation. They've forbidden the earning of a living by transporting food. That's called exploitation. These are all catchwords of the communists, isn't it? Aren't they? They ignored the 1982 report that predicted mass starvation if the programs continued. And they've spent 1/2 of their gross national product on the purchase of Soviet arms. In other words, it was more important to have a well-dressed army than it is to feed the people. While people were starving in 1984, Mengistu spent over $200 million on a 10th anniversary celebration. He purchased 500,000 bottles of imported Scotch whiskey for over $2 million. He spent $1 million on champagne and $10 million on statues of the communists Marx, Lenin, and Engels. Americans voluntarily gave millions of dollars in relief that brought tons of food. Mengistu responded. 1, he held up food shipments to allow Russian arms ships to unload. 2, he placed an import tax on the food of $12.50 a ton. 3, he placed a tax of $165 a ton on the trucks carrying the food to the refugee centers. James Phillips of the Heritage Foundation studied the famine, and he's concluded, number 49. Mengistu is deliberately using famine as a weapon to get at all those who oppose his rule. Jeffrey Hart, a syndicated columnist, summarized all of this Marxist manipulation thusly. 50. The starvation in Ethiopia is man-made. Why would Mengistu intentionally starve his people? In 1978, he said this, number 51. Our goal is socialism and communism. He identified the problem. It wasn't a drought that was causing the starvation. It was the economic and political philosophy known as communism. Nikolai Lenin, the communist, summarized this problem thusly. Number 52. Famine today performs a progressive function, destroying the peasant economy. It forces peasants from the villages to the city. In other words, we communists accept famines, intentionally created famines, to move people around, to further control them. The Ethiopian communists are doing the same thing. This article appeared in 1985 and says that Ethiopia was using food to force the Ethiopian people to relocate. The article said that the Marxist government had broken up families and had moved people to the southern part of the country in an effort to depopulate areas in the northern provinces. One witness said, quote, "You don't get food unless you sign up for resettlement," unquote. Lenin, the communist in Russia, created a similar famine in 1921 in Russia. He told his fellow communists, number 53, "We are destroying the bourgeoisie as a class." The bourgeoisie is the middle class. The very first question you must ask when you interrogate is to what class he belongs, of what origin, education, and profession he is. Only these questions will determine his fate. Now, this is a typical picture that came out of Ethiopia. It shows starving Ethiopians on a road to a feeding station. Above their head is a poster of the communist Lenin from Russia. It was the economic philosophies of Lenin that caused the famine, but the poster probably doesn't say that. But the Russian government, we believe, will help the people. We believe that, don't we? They care about the Ethiopian people, don't they? We've heard that, haven't we? The communists are intended to help people who are down and out. That's what it's for. The Russian communist government has only sent 10,000 metric tons of rice and 5 billion, with a B, $billion worth of arms. The problem in Ethiopia is not a drought. It is communism. That's enough of that. Let's get on to the subject of the New World Order, the New International Order. Richard Nixon said it. The United Nations said it. Henry Kissinger said it. Nelson Rockefeller said it. Jimmy Carter said it. The World Council of Churches said it. And George Bush said it. They've all said that the world needs either a new international order, a new world order, or a new international economic order. Let me give you some quick examples. Richard Nixon said this as president on May the 3rd, 1973, number 54. The United States has a decisive contribution to make in creating a new international order. Henry Kissinger said this in 1976, number 55. Not every generation is given the opportunity to shape a new international order. If the opportunity is missed, we shall live in a world of chaos and danger. Now, why would the old order cause chaos and danger? In 1961, the Council on Foreign Relations said this, number 56. The United States must maintain and gradually increase the authority of the United Nations in order to build a new international order. So we can finally begin to see what this new international order is all about. The increase of the power of the United Nations, or a one world government. In 1936, the Communist Internationale presented a 3-page plan for creating a world government. Here's that plan, number 57. 1. Socialize all the nations. 2. Create regional unions of these nations. And 3. Join these socialist regional nations into a world union. So the plan is to give us a world government through 3 stages. Now, this would be a good place to end. Next week, we'll continue our study of those 3 stages that we've got to go through to get to this one world government. And we're going to examine this phrase, the New World Order, the New International Order, the New World International Order. And we're going to continue that next week. So I invite you to tune in again next week as we continue to explore.
Welcome to Secrets of History, a series of lectures exploring the conspiratorial view of history. It is the contention of historian Ralph Epperson that wars, revolutions, and depressions are planned years in advance, and that those who have been involved in the planning of these events have been ensuring that their involvement has been removed from recorded history. It will be Ralph Epperson's purpose to discuss the major events of the past and to remove the veil that has been utilized to cover up the secrets of history.
Welcome to Secrets of History. My name is Ralph Epperson, and I'm the host of this series. Secrets of History is a 24-week lecture series which will explore the conspiratorial view of history. I have been studying the view that holds that the major events of the past have been caused intentionally. About 2 years ago, I published my book entitled The Unseen Hand and subtitled it An Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. There it is. That book came out in 1985. Tonight's session is number 17 in the series, and tonight we're going to continue our study of the New World Order and what it means, and also introduce you to a secret society called the Trilateral Commission. We'll discuss that and its role in electing Jimmy Carter as President of the United States. Let's go back to our discussion of last week where we discussed the three-stage plan, or we started to discuss the three-stage plan for creating a world government. If we can, let's briefly summarize those. We'll go to number 57. First part of the program is to socialize all the nations of the world. 2 is to create a regional union of those nations. And 3, join those into a world union. Step number 1 is on schedule here in America. Number 2, we're going to create regional unions of these socialist nations. And you know, the United States has already joined all sorts of treaties with all sorts of socialist nations. We have these regional unions, such things as CETO, NATO, and the OAS. We've joined with other socialist nations. Step number 2 is on schedule. Number 3, we're going to join those socialist nations into a world union of socialist nations. The United States did not join the first union of socialist nations called the League of Nations, but they did join the second, the United Nations. The United Nations is still in effect and could very easily be the world government of the future. Step number 3 is on schedule. An American communist by the name of William Z. Foster wrote a book entitled Toward a Soviet America. He too showed his support of the plan for the world government. Mr. Foster wrote this, number 58. The time will come, of course, when there will be a world government, but it will be the government of a world socialist community. And the socialists and the communists want to run that one world government. How is America going to get the new world government? One who gave us a clue was this man, Richard Gardner. Richard Gardner was a professor of law at Columbia University who wrote this, number 59. We are likely to do better by building our house of world order from the bottom up rather than from the top down. An end run around national sovereignty, eroding it, meaning national sovereignty, piece by piece, is likely to get us to world order faster than the old-fashioned frontal assault. I'd like to try to explain what Professor Gardner meant by that comment. I'd like to go to the blackboard to discuss that. The American people have the greatest amount of personal freedom in the history of the world. How are you going to get the American people to surrender that freedom, that sovereignty, to a one world government? There are really 2 ways to defeat your enemy. Number 1 is by a frontal assault. You march your troops out into the battlefield, and I'll march mine out, and then we start the war. This is the one way that you are bound to lose, or at least get a 50-50 chance. If this army or this side is stronger than this side, this one might very well win. It's very risky. It encourages continuous opposition. Even when this side, let's say this side wins and this side loses, there is encouragement for him to continue to battle, to overthrow this, to get rid of this conqueror. And until that enemy is defeated, there is encouragement for him to continue. And you'll get continual and additional opposition. So this is very risky, this type of confrontation. If you want to beat your enemy, the way to do it, according to Professor Gardner, is to do it through the guerrilla warfare. Here's the enemy, you snipe at him, take care of this section of his flank, let's say, then you snipe at him and take care of this side, and then maybe attack from over here, and then attack from here, step at a time. If you do that, you do it through stealth and secrecy. You cut off his supplies. You spread rumors. You plant lies and deceptions in the enemy's camp. The rule is never meet your enemy head on. defeat him through this program, this stealth, this guerrilla warfare. Let me give you an example of how this works. Let's presume that I give each of you a dollar bill, or a dollar rather, $1. And I give some of you $1 in a paper dollar, and some of you 100 pennies. And then let's presume that I announce to you that I'm going to come take your dollar from each of you. Now notice, those with the dollar will probably fight. They'll say, you can't have my dollar. But I'll tell you this, if I take a penny at a time from those who have their dollar in pennies, I'm going to get the whole dollar. 1 penny at a time. I might very well even give you a penny back once in a while. But I'll tell you this, I'll get the whole thing. And the reason I'll get it is because 1 penny at a time is not worth fighting for. We'll give up our national sovereignty 1 penny at a time because each penny isn't worth fighting for. And we don't understand the game, according to Professor Gardner. The way to win, to get all of the one world government, is to erode national sovereignty piece by piece. I promise you, they're going to get the whole dollar. This is the strategy. Erode public confidence in national governments. Convince them that nations cause wars. The solution, then, to war is to abolish national government. The New World Government will need a tax collector and a world police department and a world army to keep the peace. Let's examine that. Historian Arnold Toynbee said this, number 60, the world state will need an armed police force. The world government will have to command sufficient force to be able, notice this phrase, to impose peace. Notice, they're going to need the army to impose peace. You don't need an armed force to impose peace on a happy people. There's no need for an armed force unless the people don't want the world government. Then you need an armed force to make certain the people don't overthrow the world government. You don't impose peace on a happy, prosperous people. You impose peace when they don't want the government. And those who want a world government are aware of that. James Warburg told a Senate subcommittee on February the 17th, 1950, number 61, we shall have world government whether or not you like it, by conquest or consent. We're going to get the world government whether we like it or not. Someone else spoke about the need for a world government. Pope Paul VI wrote in a little pamphlet called This is Progress, number 62. The need is clear, of course, to have the need is clear to have in course world government by a world authority, unquote. Not only are we going to get a one world government, we are going to get a new world order. On January the 30th, 1976, 32 senators and 92 congressmen signed a document called the Declaration of Interdependence. It read in part, number 63. 2 centuries ago, meaning 1976, our forefathers brought forth a new nation. Now we must join with others to bring forth, notice the phrase, a new world order. Senator Charles Percy from Illinois, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, defined this phrase, or a close cousin to it. Here's what he said, number 64. Number 64, the philosophy behind the new international economic order is based on the fact that the developed, wealthier nations use a substantially greater share of the Earth's resources and contribute more to global pollution and environmental degradation than do the less developed, poor nations. The new order calls for a more equitable distribution of the Earth's resources among the Earth's people and redistribution of wealth among rich and poor nations. Now, where have we heard that before? Karl Marx, The so-called father of communism identified the basic philosophy of communism when he wrote this, number 65, Karl Marx, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Marx's economic order established the right of the government to take from one individual and to give it to another individual. Marxism can be applied to nations as well. Number 66, from each nation according to its ability, to each nation according to its need. That is the essence of the New World Order. Here's the problem as they see it. There are a great number of poor countries all over the world, but there are some countries who have the ability to produce more than they consume. What the new international economic order proposes is that the rich countries share their wealth with the poor nations. The new international order is pure Marxism. It's international Marxism. Marx would have approved of the new international economic order. But we in America are too smart to fall for that game, that worldwide Marxism, aren't we? Now, this is an article that appeared in our local newspaper in 1981 that reported that the have nations, meaning the rich nations, were going to a conference with the have-not nations to debate whether all nations should create a new economic order. The article said that the poor nations were hoping that the conference would lead to a, quote, restructuring of the world's economic system, unquote. President Ronald Reagan attended the meeting of that conference in or at Cancun, Mexico, in October 1981. Cancun was an interesting selection for the meeting about world poverty. It is a resort city complete with $100 a day luxury hotel rooms, charter fishing boats, and exclusive beach clubs. Representatives from 22 nations attended the meeting, 14 from the southern developing nations and 8 northern industrial nations. Now, this is a picture of the leaders of those 22 nations at this meeting. That's President Reagan to the far left. Others at the meeting were Indira Gandhi from India, Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines, Margaret Thatcher of England, and Francois Mitterrand of France. The article that accompanied that picture in Newsweek magazine said that the, quote, have-nots called for a new and more equitable world order, unquote. I guess those of us in America are lucky that they didn't bring it to a vote. The 14 have-not nations would have voted 14-8 to take our wealth for their own use. It would have been called international democracy. We've defined the word democracy before in this series as meaning the majority does what it wants, whether it's right or wrong. We're lucky they didn't vote on it at Cancun. Where did the term haves and have-nots come from? I'll give you one interesting clue. It came from President Lyndon Johnson. President Johnson said this in 1964, number 67. We are going to try to take all of the money that we think is unnecessarily being spent and take it from the haves and give it to the have-nots that need it so much. Is there any difference between what Marx said, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, and what Johnson said? There is none. The thoughts are identical. There's no difference. Others in American government have said similar statements. Robert McNamara, President John Kennedy's Secretary of Defense, said this, number 68. Affluent nations, meaning the haves, in order to expand aid, may have to accept some small further reduction in their already immensely high standard of living to help the have-nots. If they have to, they can. I'm sure you people in America will understand that we are living too well, and that the New World Order will ensure that we reduce our standard of living so that the poor nations can live better. You'll understand that, won't you? Don't let it concern you that certain nations have adopted the economic systems known as communism and socialism, and that history has repeatedly shown that these economic philosophies have not provided for their people. Those nations that have figured it out and adopted the proven free enterprise system will bail them out, won't they, under the new world order. And the socialist nations, and this is the joy of this system, don't have to change. They can continue being socialist. It's quite a program, isn't it? But the program is already in effect. On April the 11th, 1979, President Jimmy Carter's Secretary of State, Cyrus Vance, promised that the United States would step up its economic aid to the developing nations of the world in order to hasten number 69, progress toward a more equitable and healthy new international economic order. The program is in effect already. International Marxism. Others say it as well. In 1981, Perez de Cuellar of Peru, the Secretary General of the United Nations, pledged, number 70, to bring about a new international economic order to transfer wealth from the developed to the developing nations. It's in effect internationally already through the United Nations. Someone else said it. Club of Rome official Aurelio Pecci, I presume that's how you pronounce it, said this, number 71, a new international order will have to be established not just in the economic sphere, but in social and political areas as well. Changing the economic, social, and political spheres makes a new world order. It is not just a new international economic order, it's every aspect of our life. That is called the New World Order. In Latin, the New World Order is called, number 72, the Novus Ordo Seclorum. Number 73, Novus is Latin for new, Ordo is Latin for order, and Seclorum is Latin for world. The New World Order. Let me remind you, we've seen this picture before. The Novus Ordo Seclorum is on the back of our dollar bill, and we are going to get it whether we like it or not. Don't forget the strategy, number 74. Richard Gardner said, the House of World Order will have to be built from the bottom up rather than from the top down. An end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. The New World Order is coming, isn't it? I don't want it, but we're going to get it by consent or by conquest. If we are going to have a New World Order, we will need world leaders able to implement the program. I'd like to talk about one of the organizations that has stepped forward to lead us into the New World Order. This man was the President of the United States for 4 years, between 1977 and 1981. He was elected in November of 1976. Yet 3 years earlier, on December the 13th, 1973, this man was so unknown that he stumped the panel on the TV game show called What's My Line. No one knew who he was 3 years before he became President of the United States. This man, of course, is Jimmy Carter. Now, how did Jimmy Carter become President of the United States? How did he do that? During his 1976 presidential campaign, Jimmy Carter warned us about what he called a group of insiders. He said this in a book he wrote called I'll Never Lie to You by Jimmy Carter. There it is. I'll Never Lie to You, Jimmy Carter, in his own words, by the Boston Globe's award-winning reporter Robert Turner. There's the book. In this book, by the way, this book is a compilation of his thoughts collected from his speeches during the campaign. Candidate Carter said, number one, The people of this country know from bitter experience that we are not going to get these changes merely by shifting around the same group of insiders. The insiders have had their chance, and they have not delivered, and their time has run out. The time has come for the great majority of Americans to have a president who will turn the government of this country inside out. And I'm going to do that. Later, while accepting the Democratic presidential nomination, Carter denounced, number 2, those unholy, self-perpetuating alliances that have formed between money and politics. Before Carter was inaugurated, one of his advisors, Hamilton Jordan, said this, number 3, if, after the inauguration, you find Cy Vance as Secretary of State and Zbigniew Brzezinski as head of national security, then I would say that we failed, and I'd quit. In other words, we, after we're elected, are going to remove the people who have been running this country for years because we recognize that they haven't been benefiting the American people. We believe that Cyrus Vance and Zbigniew Brzezinski apparently represent those, quote, unholy alliances, unquote. And we promise you that, Carter said, that we will not appoint them to key positions within the Carter administrations once we're elected. Yet, when Carter was elected, he appointed both Vance and Brzezinski to precisely the same positions that Jordan predicted. Yet Jordan did not quit. He said, I'd quit if that happened. If Carter and Jordan thought that these two individuals were members of the same group of insiders, why did Carter appoint them to posts in his administration? Did Carter lie to us when he promised us he wouldn't? Remember, his book was entitled, I'll Never Lie to You. I'll leave the answer to that question to you. I have my answer. I believe that Carter was elected because he made his peace with the same group of insiders that he was supposedly opposed to. The reason Carter became president was because he joined a secret